Tami Katzoff, one of our moderators, to get started. Tami.
Thank you very much, Emily. Hi, everybody. My name is Tami Katzoff. I am a career advisor at American University's Career Center. I work mostly with SPA students and alumni, and I am also the pre-law advisor.
Great. And my name is Alyssa Best. I'm joining Tami as a co-moderator. I advise College of Arts and Sciences and School of Education students and alumni across multiple disciplines. And my particular interest within neurodivergency is within the ADHD population. I have coached a lot of individuals who have that particular brain-based difference. So excited to hear from everyone during our panel today. So I'm actually going to then now pass the baton to our wonderful panelists, and Rebecca, start with you.
Yeah, hi everyone, welcome. I'm really excited to be here and chat with you all. My name is Rebecca Little. I am a disability access advisor in the Academic Support and Access Center here at AU. And I'm also a student at the same time online with Baylor as a doctoral student. So I get to experience the college life from multiple perspectives. So I hope to share a lot of fun and interesting information with you all, and I welcome your questions. So Elliot, I'll pass it over to you.
Thank you very much, Rebecca. Good evening, everybody. My name is Elliot Bell-Krasner. I am a graduate of the AU School of Public Affairs. I received my master's degree in public policy in 2012 from AU. And during that time, I served as the president of the graduate student body known as the Graduate Leadership Council. I've also served as the vice president and president of the DC Young Alumni Chapter and 2 terms on the Alumni Association's board, which I just stepped down from. Professionally, I am a program services manager with Close Up Foundation, which is an educational nonprofit that conducts programs for middle school and high school students to bring them from all over the country and teach them about civics and government. My interest in this is personal. I am neurodivergent. It's commonly referred to as high-functioning autism, colloquially referred to as Asperger's. Those terms are sometimes used interchangeably, sometimes not. We'll talk about that a little perhaps later on, but very glad to be joining you, and thank you very much for taking the time. And thank you to Emily and the Career Center for organizing. With that, I'll pass it off to Dora.
Hi. Oh my God, I'm so excited to be here. I am an undergrad in the College of Arts and Sciences. I'm an American Studies major with a double minor in Spanish language and area studies and Latinx studies. My interest in neurodivergence is also very personal. I have ADHD, specifically the inattentive subtype, sometimes referred to as ADD. And I'm also on the autism spectrum, also on the high functioning spectrum. So yeah, I mean, I'm really excited to be here. I'm really happy to see that there's so many people attending. And I'm really excited that this is happening.
And Dora also, we had invited Dora to be a part of this panel before she became a Career Center student employee. So she's also in getting a chance to be a part of an official Career Center event too, from a student worker point of view as well. So really appreciate that your participation. Tami, I'm gonna pass it to you for our first question.
Okay. I think that was supposed to be you, but I'm going to do it anyway. Oh, no, that's not true. Sorry. My bad. I
guess simply the first question was please introduce yourself, right. Which is
okay. So we're at question number 2. And now I'm on it. So Rebecca, I'm going to start this one with you. What do we mean when we say neurodivergence or neurodiversity?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I love this question because I think it really, the definition of neurodivergence or neurodiversity differs depending on the person that you ask. It just means a a new way of doing things, something that may not be the same as another individual. I think that it just provides a different perspective of the way people do things or the way they think, the way they function, essentially. It's the same as diversity in cultures and ethnic backgrounds where everybody thinks differently and we all have different levels of functioning and preferences of doing things. And it's just a way to encompass all of the diversity that can be in the disability community. My friends and I like to call ourselves neurospicy. So just a little spin on that neurodivergence component to make it fun for us, because we have a lot of similarities. And I'll share that I am also diagnosed with ADHD combined type, and I also have anxiety and depression. But that doesn't mean that I can't be successful and do things and meet the goals that I want to. I just have a different way of thinking about it and a different way of processing how to go about that and how to obtain my goals. So it's just a different perspective, or, you know, a different way of thinking through things and a different way of functioning.
I like nerd spicy.
That's really cool. Elliot or Dora, do you want to chime in as far as like what your definitions would be if they're similar or different?
I think for me, I was mostly thinking about it, I think, through like a very biological scientific perspective. I actually kind of like that there's sort of like a little cultural definition that also is sort of emerging. And I really like that Rebecca touches on that, because I also do think that sometimes medical models don't fully capture the experience of neurodivergence. And I think just describing it as like a neurological difference amongst people cannot really get at that sort of difference that neurodivergence seriously tries to capture. Because neurodivergence is something that I think can be seen in the brain. There's a lot of studies that like you can actually see at a chemical level that there is a difference in the ways that ADHD and people with autism's brains are structured. And so that's another way to sort of think about it, where it's like at a fundamental basis, you are approaching the world differently. And that sometimes accounts for the differences that occur in neurodivergent people, but it doesn't always. So I really love Rebecca's point.
Just sort of bouncing off of that, you know, I mean, I again agree with everything, you know, that's been said. And I also love, you know, sort of Rebecca, you know, bringing in sort of more of the cultural, you know, diverse perspective. The way that I like to think about it is the brain is effectively a series of highways and off ramps and back roads and all of, you know, that. And there are lots of different ways that people can drive on those roads, and lots of different ways of getting to a destination there, you know, obviously meaning that there's lots of different ways of sort of processing information and getting, you know, sort of to your end point, getting to, you know, your goal. And people who, you know, identify or have been diagnosed, you know, as neurodivergent or neurodiverse, oftentimes have a different way, you know, of getting to different places than people who do not identify or have not been as diagnosed as such. But I think in the end, you know, again, as Rebecca, you know, mentioned, it doesn't mean that we're any less capable. It just basically means that we have another way of, you know, traveling down these roads. And maybe we don't always use the GPS. You know, maybe we do not always follow, you know, sort of the instructions, you know, in that sense. It can be a little messier, but it can be a heck of a lot more fun.
Thank you for that great analogy, Elliot. I have not heard that before, and I'm going to co-opt that if I may. We're gonna I'm gonna direct our next question to Elliot. So keep you in the hot seat for them for a moment. How can neurodivergence / neurodiversity benefit teams of people and organizations?
This is a great question. And some years ago, I kept, you know, again, hearing the term over and over again, how we need to think outside of the box. Okay, that's a classic term. It's very cliche. And I started thinking about it, and I wasn't, of course, the first one to come up with this by any stretch of the imagination. I can't even remember who it was that I first heard it from. But it's not thinking outside the box, okay? It's expanding the box. And when people who are like us are part of a team, we can expand the team's way of thinking. It's still working as a team. It's not doing anything that's, out of the norm. It's expanding the definition of what the norm is, and it's expanding our minds to think about approaches that, even though maybe to certain outsiders might think about thinking outside the box, we're just really broadening, the perspective. And once it's been done and it's out there, then the box is inherently bigger. And because it's bigger, people have to think about things in a different way. And they have to then, maybe say, okay, well, I didn't necessarily think about it this way. One of the benefits of that is that people will not only gain a new perspective, but they will also recognize that maybe it's not such an outlandish idea. It's not outside of the box. It's always been there. We just had to kind of discover it, in that way.
I have to appreciate that response because, like, 100%, I agree. And I find myself having this conversation a lot with other people in my network, that it's interesting to ask how someone who's neurodivergent can benefit a team of people. It's like, how can any individual benefit a team? We all have different experiences, different processes of things, and it just brings that other perspective, and it can open the doors to others that may not have thought of ways to do things. Elliot, I loved your response. I 100% back you on that.
Yeah, I mean, I really don't feel like I have something to add. I really love the way Elliot put it. Because, yeah, I mean, there's a way in which, to use the sort of road analogy, it's like we're all getting at the same sort of issues, right? It's just deciding which road we decide to take. And sometimes people haven't looked at a certain back road yet, to sort of make sure that people haven't looked at that back road. And if you haven't looked at it, you can sometimes see that there might be something intuitive, something actually like nicer about taking the scenic route, even if it looks a little bit messier or sort of can be a little bit unrecognized to outsiders.
Well, Dora, we're going to stay with you for the next one for the time being. Can you speak about your experience during the job and internship search?
Yes. So for me, I think one of the big problems I've always had has always been sort of narrowing. I always feel like I come in with like 10,000 different ideas. And so the next question is, how do I pare that down in a way that is not only digestible to other people, but also feasible for myself, right? I think there's something about having ADHD that then makes me sort of feel like I have all this time and all this energy to do all these different things. And then I realize I have very much put myself into a hole where I cannot do everything I have imagined for myself. And so it's been really helpful and really nice to sort of being able to go to the Career Center and find people who are also neurodivergent to sort of help me pare down. And I will be giving a shout out to Alyssa in this moment, because it's nice to sort of have that perspective from someone else who is also neurodivergent, right? Like, I think it's so needed. And it's something that actually has helped me in my job and internship search, which is consider, like, you have to consider your neurodivergent as part of your like internship and job search. These things are not irreconcilable. Like, you have to, because if not, I mean, you might end up doing things that are just not feasible for you. And I think that's the thing that for me is always at the forefront of my mind when I'm thinking about jobs or internships or combining schoolwork, course loads, and job and internships. It will always be, is this feasible? Especially the way the world is currently working, there are also a lot of personal responsibilities that people have. And so there's a way in which being neurodivergent makes me call attention to the ways that I'm being spread thin and in what places in my life I'm not calling attention to. And I think that's, I don't know if that's as concrete as I think the question might be lending itself to. But I think in very concrete terms, it is always helpful to reach out to other neurodivergent people. And I know it might be difficult to sort of do that, but it's important to sort of highlight that. And I think, yeah, I think that's always been the thing that's been helpful for me, is talking to other people who are neurodivergent, who work at the Career Center, and just asking for help. And if the first person you go to isn't the right person, it is always good to ask, do you potentially know someone who could help? And especially when you're visiting career centers at universities, they are willing to very much help you.
Rebecca or Elliot, can you think back to your job and internship searches?
Yeah, I can share. I have a slightly different journey. So I just received all of my diagnoses this year. I was one of those, denial is not just a river kind of people, where I was like, oh, everybody feels upset all the time, or everybody is disorganized at times. Everybody forgets appointments, whatever. And so it took me a lot longer to recognize that I needed to seek out that help that Dora was referencing. I think one of the most important pieces, and I will respond with the same statement in another question, but just give yourself grace. If you don't get that job, it's a learning experience, and you are one less no away from a yes, right? Just giving yourself grace and accepting that things are different, or you may have to navigate the application process differently or the interview process differently. It can be really stressful and overwhelming, but there's a way through it, and there's a lot of helpful support at AU. And there are a lot of resources online as well, and just accepting yourself, giving yourself grace for some of the challenges you may see, and remembering that there are positives and that there are huge successes that you're capable of despite this neurodivergence or what your diagnosis may be. That grace piece is one of the most important things that I like to share with others, because I did not give myself grace for 30 or so years. I will share. So that's my biggest takeaway on that.
I would agree with Rebecca, and I would agree with Dora. And I think that in that same vein, it's not only important to give yourself grace, and not only important to sort of reach out to, let's just say, like-minded people, and get advice with respect to it. But it's also, sort of understanding the ever-changing world that we live in. So Dora and I have about 20 years apart, give or take. So I was the class of 2004 from high school. She's the class of 2024 from college. So, there is a significant enough gap that I can say that the world was a very different place in terms of how it regarded people who were neurodiverse or are neurodiverse 20 years ago. And there's still significant stigma, and it's always comes back to, I struggled for a long time with disclose or not disclose, and when to disclose, and how to confide in people. And I got burned a few times by disclosing to others who were then very patronizing, or they were somewhat contemptuous, or they were basically in denial. And not to necessarily single out any particular group, but I honestly got the worst of it from baby boomers, people who had been born in the 1950s and the 1960s, when a lot of neurodivergency was seen as mental illness, and that's how they grew up. That's how they were educated about it. And it's taken a long, long time for, I think, boomers, and to an extent Generation X, to get more used to it, to get more comfortable with it, to become more accepting. And we've made a lot of progress, even in the last decade. And the pandemic has actually opened up even more progress, because a lot of Zoom interviews and different ways of thinking and different ways of working, and a lot of, remote, stuff, and not necessarily have to be in uncomfortable settings, but then you have to kind of get out of those, your comfort zone. So the way that I kind of think about it now, in my recent job search a couple of years ago, was I was very open and transparent about the person that I am And I embrace that. And my view is that if there is an employer out there who hears what you're saying about their personality and decides, you know what, I don't want this person working for me because it's going to be too much effort or it's going to be an annoyance or what have you, you don't want to work for that organization. You want to work for an organization that's going to be accepting, and you don't want to fit into their particular box. Okay. It's again, goes back to expanding the box. They have to be the ones that expand their perspective. They have to be the ones to be sort of accepting. Never, never, never apologize for who you are. You embrace it 110% and never feel inferior if you get turned down for a job that you believe you're qualified for because it just wasn't necessarily the right fit for both the person and the organization. It has to be the right fit or you're not going to be happy there.
Thank you, Elliot, for that impassioned speech. I feel compelled to jump out of my chair. Like cheer. I'll do the Zoom version, the quiet version of that. Wait, was there a hand that just came up, or was that or were you doing? Oh, okay, Dora.
I did.
Oh, this was that a cheer?
Little bit of both.
Okay, go for it.
I
Dora.
think Elliot just completely sort of like opened this sort of like idea that sort of came into my head, which was sort of the idea that exploring and understanding your neurodivergence is a form of career advancement. And I think that's a way in which people don't think about that, right? Where it's like figuring out what your personal strengths are as a neurodivergent person is such an important thing to sort of understand, and then becomes a very marketable sort of strategy, right? To get at sort of the idea of what Elliot was sort of getting at, where it's like we all have different sort of strengths and weaknesses, right? And one of the things that sort of becomes very frustrating as a neurodivergent person is that you're constantly feeling like you are a burden, like there is something inherently wrong with you. And I think there's a way in which one of the things that my mentors have helped me sort of come to realize is it's very easy to talk about our faults and our flaws. And I can talk very lightly on all the things about me that are not right because I've been told that my whole life. But it's very difficult to sort of change that script and sort of say, but here are what I can offer you, and here are the strengths that I can give. Because neurodivergence, right, if we think about it through a disability lens, right, is not just something that is, if thinking about it through a disability lens, it sort of allows us to sort of think of possibility. And the ways in which we don't have to compromise on what our weaknesses are, right? Like these are things that fundamentally are going to be issues that need to be accommodated, and we should have accommodated, rather than as something that we have to compromise on. And therefore, that then also means that there are things that are also just great about the ways our brains work. And we should also appreciate that fact and also own that when we're in job interviews or we're talking to people of authority, because there is something valuable about our experiences and the ways in which we think about the world. And that's another thing that I think is very much part of career development, which is also sort of finding who we are.
That's wonderful, Dora. And this actually is a perfect segue into our next question, which is, and I feel like you touched on it, but also feel free to expand on this as well. But how can we support colleagues who may identify as neurodivergent?
I will share that again, the grace, right? Like always give people grace. I think we should give everyone grace because we don't know other people's experiences. And similarly to what Dora was explaining, like others may not know, or you may not know what that individual's strengths or challenges are, and making assumptions is not helpful in the situation. In my experience, I've worked in disability support in some way, shape, or form for almost 10 years now. And it's assuming that two people are going to need the same things is just unreasonable. And it's not an individualized approach. And it, in my opinion, does not portray that you're there for the individual and there to support them and what their specific needs are. And part of that assumption piece is something I've experienced in my year of accepting who I am and what my differences are, that it's really difficult to tell someone at work, like, yeah, I do suffer from depression and things can get hard. because I do smile a lot at work. I do enjoy being around people, and I just don't let everybody into my head. And so hearing, wow, I never would have guessed is kind of like, what do you mean? Like, is that what you do? Like, it made me feel a little uncomfortable. And it's like, what do you expect then? And how do you anticipate me to interact with you, so not making assumptions. And I'm a transparent person, and I genuinely appreciate when people say, I want to know how you can feel supported. How can I best support you in this job and meeting your goals and being successful and feeling as though you're contributing and a big value to our company. I appreciate that because it makes me feel heard and seen as an individual, while acknowledging that I may have some differences or may need a couple extra calendar reminders for a task I have to complete by the end of the week. And just avoiding the assumptions and showing that you're there for the individual, I think, is one of the key things that helps me feel successful and supported and valued in my place of work. And I kind of apply that in my personal relationships as well. I try not to assume what other people should behave like or what they should look like with the diagnosis. And then always asking to their comfort, is it okay if I ask you some questions to best understand how I can work with you, or how I can be a great friend to you? Those are things that I welcome. Not everybody is the same as me, but those are some things that I appreciate and what I try to do in supporting the students that I serve here at AU, as well as the community at large.
Rebecca hit on 2 points that I think I wanted to expand on. The first is, one of the best ways that I think you can support, and I would agree with her on this, is, to not necessarily make assumptions, and based on stereotypes, or what you may have read in the news, or what have you. And, the way that I think about it is you really need to look a little longer. There's this saying, first impressions are lasting impressions. To hell with that. Seriously, to hell with that. Don't judge somebody based on your first meeting with them. Get to know them. If you're not interested in getting to know them, if you really want to, especially when you're a coworker, yes, are you going to have similarities and differences? Absolutely. Are your work styles going to sometimes be, sort of at odds with each other? Absolutely. Do you need to have those conversations about how, sort of you can support the person's work style, and then the neurodivergent person needs to have conversations about how you can support, how we can support, their work style? Absolutely. But in the end, it comes down to not only being accepting and empathetic, but also then, kind of feeding into the, the second point. It's really important to acknowledge that when somebody confides in you about who they are, to not only find ways to support them, but also just basically be an advocate, and ask questions, be curious, okay? Because everybody is different in that respect, and it will ultimately lead to questions being asked in return. And I come back to this example that comes from my time at AU. And it was when Sarah McBride, who's a name that you probably have heard, a very prominent AU alumna, who's now running for Congress in Delaware's 1st Congressional District, or Lone Congressional District. She's currently a state senator. She and I served as counterparts together. And when I was the president of the GLC, she was the president of the undergraduate student government. And when she came out to me as transgender, the only thing really that was going through my head was, okay, what can I do? What do you need right now, if there's anything, besides just hearing you out? And I asked a few questions here and there because I was really curious. And because this is somebody who I'd known for the better part of the year, before she had come out. And it led to sort of some good questions and some good answers. And you're never going to know unless you dig a little, and also, again, look a little longer, right? And if you do that, then you're really signaling to the person that you're not like feeling sorry for them. You really want to be there for them and help them. And if they don't necessarily need a particular help with a particular task, that's okay. Just knowing that you're there as a resource and as a sounding board can do really great benefits.
Get curious and stay curious. Sounds like it is kind of a kernel from that. Yeah. Showing compassion, showing grace, some other takeaways and themes that have come up. It's great.
Okay, I'm gonna move on. Yeah. Excuse me. Elliot, I'm gonna stay with you for this one. Sorry about the coughing. What tips would you have for students who identify as neurodivergent and may feel anxiety or nervousness around the job or internships? Excuse me. Search process.
You all right, Tami? Get some water.
No, I think we sort of touched on this earlier, right? It's about being yourself. It's about sort of understanding, meeting people where they're at, but helping them to meet you where you're at. Again, embracing who you are, but it really is also about finding an environment that that you're going to thrive in. Something that I knew about my current organization when I really knew that it was the right place for me was when my, soon-to-be manager asked me what I felt were the good qualities like in a manager for me, not like broadly, but how could, he be a good manager for me? What does that mean? So that signaled to me that he wanted to kind of work with my work style and help me as an individual on his team. I wasn't just a cog in the wheel. I was somebody joining his team and the organization, and he wanted to help me achieve my very best by managing me in a way that would help me. Not all employers have that luxury. I get this. Okay, I understand this. But you do need to find organizations where you know that you are going to be supported. Because even though you might think that a particular organization may be your dream job, if it is not an organization that at this time is going to support you for who you are, then it's not going to be your dream job. It's going to turn into a nightmare very quickly. And you may think of it as a wasted opportunity. Now, that isn't to say that I'm not discouraging people for going through the challenging things and then trying to break the mold. I'm a big believer in that. I always have been. I have been a nonconformist since I was a preschooler, okay? And being a nonconformist oftentimes means you need to push the envelope in that sense, all right? But at the same time, you need to take a step back and realize that not everybody is going to be able to meet you where you're at right away. And when you find that harmony, right, then you can find opportunities where you can thrive and you can grow. And then as you gain confidence, you can find coping mechanisms with anxiety, which I have. I have my mechanisms. And I think that you can help other people in the workplace understand that, to create a supportive environment, they need to break out of that traditionalist model and realize that if they really do want to be, that DE&I model, right? Diversity, equity, inclusion, it has to include people who are neurodivergent, because unfortunately, we are oftentimes not included in that conversation. And that's a huge problem because we don't necessarily fit into one of those boxes. It's not about checking the boxes. It's about actually making a genuine effort. And you can tell that very clearly through the interview process, through the questions that you ask and the answers that you receive. I'm sorry to be a little long-winded about this.
It's your passion, and we're all about it, Elliot. Don't worry. I agree. I am a firm believer in gut feelings. And I know for those of you that experience anxiety, if it's similar to mine, sometimes you don't know if you should trust your gut. But I think it's in the process, like in the very beginning, remembering to just take a breath and think about what it is you truly are looking for in a job. Is it just to get money? Is it to make a difference in a certain area, practice a certain skill? Is it a stepping stone to what your long-term goals are? And take it one day at a time. For me, it's very easy to all of a sudden look at the big picture and feel very overwhelmed by all of the possibilities, the unknowns, the ambiguity, like all of it is really overwhelming for me. But I've learned prior to these diagnoses, at least, if I can take a breath and remember what my goal is, why do I want this particular job, or what am I looking for? That's then the focus. So try to narrow it down. Think about what's most important to you and what your goals are in this job or internship search. And take it one step at a time. And I haven't worked with the Career Center often, but I hear wonderful things. So if you're here at AU, that's certainly a support. There are also community supports that are available and helping students manage the application process or the interviewing process for those who are neurodivergent. And just taking it one day at a time and not beating yourself up because you can't accomplish the big picture. So once again, giving yourself grace, just one step at a time, taking a breath, and just remembering what your goals are is also really important in that process.
Yeah, I think on Rebecca's point about like giving yourself grace, I think there's a way in which what is not often acknowledged, especially with people who have ADHD and are autistic, that a lot of the time depression and anxiety, these other sort of like mental health struggles, they're part of life, right? That it's as much as you can love things, you can burn yourself out by loving something too much. And that is entirely like a real sort of phenomena that you sort of have to deal with. Because there's a way in which you might be so focused on something you love that you forget to sort of acknowledge every part of yourself that needs to be fulfilled. And so that anxiety and that sort of like feeling of uneasiness is okay and valid and will be part of sort of any experience you sort of have. And that it's okay. It's part of being neurodivergent. And so that's another thing that you can sort of take into account while sort of like going through the job and interview process of how do I feel in this sort of setting? Do I feel comfortable enough to sort of be able to have these conversations? And like I think Elliot said earlier, if you're not feeling as if it's possible for you to do that, maybe it's not the right fit, and maybe this isn't the right sort of place for you. And it's okay to go back and sort of rework what you want. Like I came into college and I thought actually came in as a history major. Quickly in my first semester, changed it to be a political science major, and then changed it to be an American studies major. And so I reworked the sort of drawing board multiple times. And that's also entirely possible to do. And it is sort of difficult because I think there is also, especially like for kids who came out of high school in 2020, like I did, and who are sort of graduating right now, there's a sort of sense of anxiety and ease about the world that also makes it more difficult to sort of feel as if you have time to figure things out. And so that's something that I'm trying to deal with by myself and sort of trying to find different ways to sort of cope with the fact that I think I will have time to figure it out. And I think the anxiety is sort of pressured by all these other different factors, but that I sort of need to remember to take care of my emotional well-being as much as I necessarily care about career and job opportunities.
I will share too, because Dora mentioned changing plans a few times. That happens. I started out my college career thinking that I was going to be in food science. And then after a semester, I was like, not it. Let me do nursing. Not it. Then I went into human development. Then I went into special education. I worked in a preschool. I worked in a post-secondary support program. I worked at a bagel store for a year. And now I'm here at AU. So things can change. That's okay. It's part of the process. We may not feel like the process is necessarily knowing that we're trusting it, but trust the process. It's one step at a time, one day at a time. You can change your mind, and that's totally okay.
I appreciate that, Rebecca, because I think that hearing about the circuitous paths that many of us take to the positions that we have now is so helpful for students to hear, because I think that there is a lot of pressure that students may face, whether we're coming from internal, external forces around having to figure out a plan and a sense of that there's kind of a direct route from point A to point B. So I appreciate also like knowing that you're sharing that experimentation is part of the process and continuing to check in with yourself and around, so like I think we can all feel assured that you are here in a feeling very much like you need to be here. This is and this is that your path is taking you to this point, and it's bringing everything to bear. So appreciate that perspective as well, and that's in your story. I know we're just hearing a little snippet from each of you about your backgrounds too, but I want to ask sort of I'm going off book for a moment. It's sort of a sub question to this question around tips for students or folks in general, alumni maybe listening to this or watching this this presentation as well. What are questions that you all might recommend, either you've asked employers or that you wish that you had asked, or Rebecca and Elliot, perhaps, as if there's questions that people have asked of you, employees, potential prospective candidates have asked of you, in terms of just kind of assessing, is this an environment that's a good fit for me?
So during my last job search, we were just starting to climb out of the pandemic. It was September, October of 2021. We didn't know about Omicron yet. That would kind of throw us back briefly, but I really wanted to know sort of what the office culture was like post-COVID, what it had been like during COVID, what it was like post-COVID, because I was really curious to know how COVID had changed things, because I recognized that change could very well have been permanent. In other words, whatever the office culture had been before, forget it. It didn't matter. It's what it is now and what it's going to then be. So that's really what I wanted to know, what I was walking into in that sense. And I asked that in every single interview. And I also remember being asked by multiple prospective employers about why I was trying to make the shift from a role that I had been in for. So a little bit of background. I got my job with the Junior State of America Foundation in May of 2019, after I had been with the American Council of Young Political Leaders, an international nonprofit, for over 6 years, and had worked my way up the ladder until kind of hitting my head on the ceiling. So it made sense about making that jump. But I'd only been with JSA at that point about, 2 years. So people wondered, and I was very, very upfront with them about the reasons and my interest level in a particular job. And I think they appreciated that level of transparency, because I wasn't telling them what they wanted to hear. I think one of the best tips that I can give people, especially those who are neurodivergent, don't try to fit into a mold. Do not tell employers just what you think they want to hear, because they've already heard it. And your goal is to separate yourself from others, other candidates. How are you going to stand out? And I think to stand out, you need to say something that really makes them think, this person's interesting. I want to know more. And they don't just sort of cast your resume aside with all the others, right? And it, sure, it's your skill set, obviously maximizing how you're communicating your skill set. But honestly, if you've gotten to the interview phase, chances are you're a 1% candidate at that point. They're not going to interview. If they read 200 resumes, I can promise you, they're not going to do more than around maybe 20 interviews maximum. And really, then they're going to narrow it down from there. So you've already exceeded the expectations. To land it, then you really need to stand out. And I honestly think that's where it can be a strength, because you can show that your unique approach to processing information, going down that road, whatever it is going to be different than the run-of-the-mill candidate.
Yeah, I will jump off of what Elliot said in the beginning of his response, in that the work culture is really important to ask about in the interview process. And I would honestly give that advice to any individual, whether they are neurodiverse or not. When I first moved to Maryland, I interviewed at a job, and I don't even remember the name of the school, but I asked that question. I said, so what's the work culture like here between staff members and between your students? And they looked at each other and they literally went, I mean, it's getting better. And I was like, I'm out. Thank you for your time. Because, whether there's neurodiversity there or not, the culture is important. If they're people that like to escape into their office, that's not the vibe for me. I like communicating. I like asking questions. I like collaborating with people and working as a team in our business, even though we have our own individual responsibilities. Another piece that I like to think about in that process is just your comfort level of sharing what your challenges are in the workplace, or what you may see as your challenges. It's up to you if you want to share them, but as an individual who has hired people before, I value when people tell me what they wish they would be able to do differently, or things that they're working to improve on. I love that transparency. I recognize that that's not everyone's preference, and not everybody appreciates that transparency in the way that I do. But I think being honest and real about what's difficult for you is important. Wording it in a positive way is good too, if you can, but if not, word how you're going to improve that, or how you imagine you could, work through those difficulties in that specific job. Yes, answering emails every day might be difficult, but I have a calendar reminder every day that I can put in from 9 to 9:30 to address my emails. That's actually on my schedule, if you were curious. I have that 30 minutes to make sure that I'm organizing my day before work and knowing what I need to do. Another question that I really value in the interview process, and I have always asked this question because I know it's important to me, I ask who the direct supervisor of the position I'm interviewing for is. And if they're in that interview, I explicitly ask them, what are your preferred communication styles with your team members? Because I like that open door communication. I like being able to send a message to my supervisor on Teams, asking a quick question, or popping over to her office to say, hey, do you have a minute? I need some support from this, or whatever the issue may be. If I had a supervisor that was not willing to answer those on the fly questions that I have, or willing to talk through some difficulties, and I was expected to completely be on my own, I know that that's not a good work environment for me and my mental well-being and my ability to feel successful in my role. So I think it's important to consider what's important to you as an employee, and find a way to ask those questions to who you're interviewing with to ensure that you're going to have the team that you enjoy working with, or not. Or if you like to be in your office and not talk to people, make sure it's an environment that's feasible for that. Thinking about what's important to you and explicitly asking those questions to get those answers before an offer is even on the table can help you decide, is this something that I will pursue? Will I feel successful here? Will I be happy here? Those are all really important things to consider in this process too. Jobs are important, paying your bills, yeah, it's all important, but so is your mental well-being and you being happy or, you know, feeling good in what your role as an individual is.
Okay. I think we're gonna wrap up this portion of the panel by a question for everyone, and whoever wants to take it first can take it. What's one takeaway you think that our participants should have today? If it was only one takeaway, what do you think it should be?
I like it to be that you are capable of doing what you want to do. It may not look exactly how you originally envisioned it or anticipated it, but you're capable. It's difficult to accept who you are at times. It's difficult for me to accept that. It can be difficult having those conversations of why you forgot to send an email, you know, in a timely fashion, or why you forgot to do something, but you're capable. You are capable. Being flexible with yourself and understanding of yourself and giving yourself grace and just recognizing things might be difficult at times. However, you are capable. You can hold a job. You can be successful. You can make a lot of money, whatever your you know ambitions are, but you are fully capable. And there are people here that are willing to support you and want to support you and kind of help push you over to, you know, do what you want to do and be that successful individual, whatever it looks like for you.
And I think just to expand on what Rebecca has just said, I really want to emphasize the idea of your abilities will change. Because I think there's a way in which like people forget that it's like your needs will change through different sets of circumstances and times. Like there are some days where I'm like, oh, I'm feeling very autistic today, which means social responses are not going to come easy. I remember this one time I was working as a front desk person, and I was just forgetting to greet people because my automatic isn't I have to say hi and be perky every single second that I see somebody. And so like that is a genuine thing that I have to sort of think about and sort of do. And a lot of the times it's a very fast process, but some days when I'm tired or overwhelmed, it's just not a natural response. And sometimes within workplace culture, it can come off as rude, or it can come off as like one way or another, and you're not necessarily trying to be those things, but what happens is that sometimes your needs and your ability to do things is different. Maybe I won't say diminished, right? But your ability to sort of communicate and socialize or whatever it might be, right, will look differently. I also know that sometimes I can go nonverbal. And so that means that my literal physical way of communicating in a way that is legible to people also completely goes out the window. And so sort of thinking of ways in which to sort of like, how do I make this work for me? And how do I create a safe environment to sort of be able to have that honest conversation of like, this is what's going on. This is not forever. This is not a temporary sort of experience, but how do I get through this sort of rough patch? And that's another thing that I sort of like want people to keep in mind, that it's like these sort of abilities are fluid. Sometimes it'll come a little bit easier. Sometimes it'll be a little bit harder. And it might change with age. Like I remember when I was younger, I could hyperfixate for 3 days and sort of forget to eat, forget to sleep, and I'd be perfectly fine. I cannot do that anymore. Or also the fact that there's also a lot of comorbidity with other disabilities that also come with being neurodivergent, like dyscalculia, dyslexia, just all these other sort of dyspraxia, just all these other sort of disabilities that also complicate just the fact that you are neurodivergent, right? And that's another thing that also might come up, but it's like all of a sudden your body might not be as reliable as you sort of thought it was at one point. And also dealing with that fluctuation, that is also normal. And it's not something that is necessarily something to be afraid of, but something to keep in mind and to be mindful of, and to sort of try to be in contact with like healthcare providers if possible, because that might also be something that comes up. It might be something to take into consideration when thinking of like career paths.
I want to share really quickly. I know, Elliot, it's your turn to respond, but Dora said that like it changes day to day. I've been upfront with my colleagues and I will message them on Teams on my way to work. Like, I'm not really in it today, so I'm going to close my door and I'll open it when I'm ready to socialize. And they're totally on board with that. They get it. They don't bother me. They don't message me. They know that I need that time because I've shared it. And I personally think there's nothing wrong with saying, don't disturb me. I'm just not in the mood for it right now. As long as it's respectful, I think it's appropriate to communicate that with the people you work with as well.
No, absolutely. I would agree with both Rebecca and Dora about sort of being your own, your best self, whatever that self is. And, there are some days when, you really are going to struggle, and that is okay. And if you're open and you're transparent and you have supportive colleagues, it won't matter because you can be able to, sort of take the time, that you need, battle, sort of the, so to speak, inner demons, if you will, and be able to kind of, face the world in your own way. Over my shoulder, there's one of the pictures is of former President John F. Kennedy speaking at American University. JFK had Addison's disease, which is an adrenal gland deficiency that he battled all of his life. He also suffered from a bad back, in part because of an injury during World War II. He battled constantly every single day of his life with significant adversity that should never have allowed him to do the things that he was able to do. And whether or not you think of him as a success or a failure from a historical standpoint, from a personal standpoint, he certainly had his personal flaws, and that's widely acknowledged. But 60 years ago, when he spoke at AU, he ended his commencement address by saying that in the final analysis, our most basic common link is that we all inhabit this small planet. We all breathe the same air. We all cherish our children's futures, and we are all mortal. Life is too short to become fixated on one person's quirks, or their particular style or their work, habits or what have you, accepting them for who they are, embracing them for who they are, embracing yourself for who you are, and being your very best self, whatever that self is, day to day, knowing that it'll change. If you do this, and then you're also supportive in turn, it's going to really be much easier than trying to make something of, nothing, basically, in that way.
Amazing. I want to turn, I'm sorry, speechless, so I'm just going to, I'm going to just pause on that. I want to open up to any Q&A from our participants. Okay, I'm saying, I don't know if everyone can see this, but do you have tips for navigating networking / cold messaging and the anxiety that comes with it?
Yeah, I can share a little bit about that. I was a program assistant at a company, and it was really difficult to call people that I didn't know. One thing that helped the experience itself, it helped me feel a little more in control of the experience. I set out a script. I spoke with my supervisor and I was like, what am I supposed to be asking these people? And from the information he shared with me, I wrote out a little script and I had it up on my screen. And every time I called, it's like, the jokes about telemarketers where they're flipping through a book to try to find the right answer. But, having that script or at least some kind of guidance helped me feel in control of the phone call and that I knew what I could expect next as of what my response would be. So just kind of finding a strategy that could make the experience feel a little easier, or if your anxiety is about a control challenge like mine is, be something that can help you feel more in control of the situation is always helpful for me. So whether it's a script or having a partner with you, maybe asking your supervisor, can you sit beside me for the first call? Can I observe you do a cold call first? Some kind of strategies that work for you in the past that you know of that help you feel a little more calm or control of the situation. that's definitely my recommendation. Scripts, 100%, all about those.
I would agree with that. I also think that, I mean, scripts can be certainly, helpful until you can kind of get confident in your own voice, and really find, sort of the sweet spot. I also think that trying to meet people on your turf, so to speak, in an environment that's comfortable to you. I remember when I was doing some cold, networking, emails and things like that, asking people to go to coffee with me, I would try to, obviously find a location near to them, but I would never try to meet them like at their office, or really, in a place with a lot of commotion, or what have you. I would try to meet them in a setting that I was comfortable with, but was convenient enough for them, so that I could show, sort of respect for them and their time, but also I could go into it, feeling as prepared as I could. And I think that, in terms of networking in an event, almost being able to, have a set of questions that you want to ask. And then not only that, but also being able to have kind of backup questions that, depending on who you meet, there might be a question that is more appropriate for one particular person. I go to these networking events all the time where students kind of they're asking a lot of the same sort of questions no matter who they're meeting. And it's very clear to me that they're doing it because it's almost automated, but you have to recognize each person is going to be different. You have to get to know them. And then when you get to know them a little bit, then you can kind of pivot and ask questions that are appropriate to that person.
Yeah, and I think for me, one of the things that has sort of helped deal with my anxiety, as Rebecca mentioned, scripts are great. Just because I think for me, like as an autistic person, I sometimes don't always know what a social situation looks like. And I sort of need to sort of like almost make a character. This is a whole other like sub tangent that I can sort of go on, but the idea of like using characters to sort of accentuate different parts of your personality. Like I remember, especially when I was younger, and I was doing a lot of performing arts, being a character sometimes actually really helped to sort of like construct the then personality that would sort of mold later. Because I think the idea of masking is especially something that a lot of autistic people know about. And sometimes you can use those masks as sort of way in which use that as a strength rather than as something that is necessarily something that has to feel like a burden. Because I think some days I can sort of choose, well, this is the part of my personality I want to show today. And this is the way in which I will now frame this social situation in my head of like, this is the part of my personality I want to show people. And simultaneously find a sort of social script that can sort of help you navigate that sort of situation, especially when it comes to networking events, especially the ones on campus. One of the things that I sort of tell myself is I want to get X amount of people's phone numbers if possible, or I want to get X amount of things accomplished or X amount of questions asked. Because that also is a way in which you sort of make the task a little bit more manageable for yourself. Because especially when you go into networking events, there's like 15 employers that you're sort of looking at the same time. And there's a lot of movement, there's a lot of people. And so you need to find a way in which to make that very manageable for yourself. And sometimes setting that goal of a phone number is very helpful. Not even necessarily for job opportunity, but maybe just to sort of talk to someone and figure out something about a career that you might necessarily enjoy. And that to me sort of takes away a little bit of the anxiety, because then at the end you can feel accomplished and give yourself a little treat that you got like X amount of phone numbers. So you can go get yourself like a little coffee or something at the end and sort of be very excited that like you got something accomplished. I'm big on getting yourself treats. That's a big thing for me. But also like when it comes to cold messaging, love having friends and people around, because that's always helpful, because sometimes they'll be able to sort of navigate a social situation in a way that I might not be able to, and sort of having that feedback feels a little bit more reassuring. Or going to networking events with friends and sort of having make like a little sort of obstacle course out of a space for yourself. And really like making a space a little bit more approachable for yourself is something that I would definitely recommend. Whether it means gamifying your life if you have to, or just having sort of someone comforting there. I would also say maybe stim toys if necessary, right? Like have like an anxiety ring if you need to, or have maybe a fidget toy, just something to sort of be there to sort of be your sort of grounding point, whether it be a script or a combination of other different things.
And I actually think, just sort of bouncing off of that, Dora hit on something really important, which is, and again, this goes back to the whole being your true self, right? And embracing who you are. You know, if you go to networking events and you have certain quirks, you know, people hopefully will ask you, you know, they'll be open to the conversation. But if you see, you know, them sort of looking a little awkward or, um, you know, you can kind of almost intuit. I sometimes have a tough time reading facial expressions, and things of that sort if people are not very obvious with their expressions. And so sometimes I have to kind of then ask the question, like, hey, I see you kind of glancing at, this. You want to know more? And look, it's natural, okay? It is. And anybody that tells you otherwise is kidding themselves. I mean, we look at certain things because we're conditioned to look at certain things a certain way. And, we need to obviously break out of that habit, but it's, it shouldn't, just like Rebecca said, giving yourself grace, you have to also give other people grace to an extent. You can't jump down their throat, and assume that they, very rarely do I ever assume negative intent, ill intent. But intent versus impact is very important. And I think it's important for people to have learning experiences. And as you're going to these networking events, and as you're navigating certain situations, in terms of beating back your anxiety, one of the things to remember is that you're walking into a room full of people who probably all have their own quirks too. And some of them are maybe a little bit less pronounced than others, but they still have them. Every individual is unique in that sense. And none of us, is, fallible, infallible rather, my mother likes to say we're all works in progress. And it's really about trying to, as Dora kind of said, finding your, kind of comfort zone, finding your way of navigating things and being okay with that. There isn't one way to necessarily approach it. And once again, it's about breaking that mold, because maybe if you're doing it a little different, it'll make people think, oh, there's a different way of doing this, and they'll be more open-minded. You're going to educate them in that sense.
Having a bot, like a couple of things. The body doubling is an excellent technique for that Dora mentioned, and which essentially is, I mean, that can kind of mean a lot of different things, but I think like with having, like, inviting a friend to join you for a networking event is a way to body double, where you it's like an accountability partner, and you have someone who's there to cheer you on, you can check, circle back to. So I love that technique. I also will just do, make a plug for not just the Career Center, but other campus centers, your professors, staff, other students who, you're like, if you're involved in student activities, who can also help to prep with you on a networking strategy. We know we're here to help, help you kind of craft your quote unquote elevator pitch, and how to answer that question. Tell me about yourself. And, we can do role plays together. We have interviewing, mock recording AI generated interviewing software, so you can practice in the comfort of your own space and before even having a live conversation with any of us. And so I've sat down with folks, and we've generated, we've crafted together. I'll let the individual take the lead, of course, and be generating the content, but I'll brainstorm with them how to send in a kind of a cold contact message to someone on LinkedIn that they want to schedule an informational interview with. And, then they can send that off in the scope of our meeting. And then usually by the next time, I've had people say, oh, that person reached back out to me, and, that kind of thing. So I remember one student who I said, great, you can ask for a call. And she was like, a call? I think she wanted just to try to have a more of an exchange over email. And I said, well, that's fine. I said, but I think it'd be really rewarding if you could, would you agree that it would be good to try to schedule like a call or video chat to learn more? And she was kind of like, that's scary. And I was like, I know, well, we're going to work through it. So we're here to kind of chunk down the process.
Any other questions?
Oh, does the AI laugh? Oh, Elliot asked, does the AI laugh at your jokes because it has to laugh at your jokes? So it's, when I say it's the tool that I'm referencing is called Big Interview. And Elliot, as an alum, you also have access to. Also, I can send you a link to that resource. You can find instructions on how to access Big Interview through your Handshake account, and it's it's a free tool for AU students and alumni to use. But essentially you can, it'll track, like you can, it doesn't actually sort of respond. It's not kind of responsive to you in the moment, but it'll track like how well you're making eye contact with the webcam, for example, or how often you say like filler words. And you can also practice it without that tracking as well. But it's essentially actors who've already prepared some questions, and it simulates that type of interaction. Oh, let's see. Emily's chiming in. Big Interview does now include an answer relevancy score to let you know if you're on the right track with your response. That's great. Thank you. Thank you. Yep. We could have a whole other side conversation about AI and as a tool to assist with neurodivergence. I just quickly say that I was talking with an individual who has ADHD, who disclosed to me that they have ADHD, and trying to figure out sort of a way of handling a question around why they no longer work at their last organization. And this is someone who's further along in their career path, and we were brainstorming some content, and then they put it into ChatGPT, it was like, write this better. And then in session I saw this person do that, and what ChatGPT spit back out was amazing. I mean, it did wordsmith that to perfection. I said, I was like, I think it's excellent as a when you're kind of having that like writer's block sort of situation, or you want to just make something a little more polished, a little bit more professional.
I do, however, want to sort of touch on that, though, Alyssa. And again, we have to be wary, at some level. I mean, again, I think these tools can be really wonderful. GTP can be a good tool. I saw a tweet the other day. I don't know whether or not it's indicative of anything, mind you, but apparently, somebody had run a resume through the software and had asked, should I hire this person? And we do have to be cognizant of the fact that, employers may decide to start using the software to read resumes, to read cover letters. I know that some of you on the call tonight and those who are watching the video, which is going to be posted afterwards, will be aware of the fact that there are employers that use certain softwares to look for certain keywords and key phrases and numbers and things like that. And if your resume doesn't have that, it just kind of gets cast aside. And I wish I could say that that was a one-off, like the kind of the exception, not the rule, but I don't necessarily know that that's the case. But you have to, as you can tailor your message as much as you're able to, but especially when you get to that, that point of the cover letter, it's so exceptionally important to really not just talk about like your resume and stuff like that, but really hammer home those key points about who you are in terms of those skills. What do those skills mean for you and then for the organization, and how the organization can benefit, because it can cut through a lot of that, the employers running it through a software type thing, so that if you can almost like trick the software, so to speak, and force the employer to actually really read it and take the time, and it's not easy to do this at some level. But I think that, once again, it's whether or not the environment is right for you. And sometimes, employers need to have enough setback sometimes with trying to find somebody who's a perfect fit, and then they have to expand, the candidate pool, to people who are then trainable. who have a terrific personality, who have terrific qualities. Maybe they lack something, but they can be trained. And it's all about conveying the fact that, and again, one of the strengths oftentimes people who are neurodiverse have is that ability to be able to think critically and sometimes too critically, and, to be able to, just analyze information in a unique way. And that means that we have the ability to be able to learn a process and learn a software, but then say, okay, how can I make this better? And there's a time and a place to be able to bring that up, obviously, but we can be quick learners in that sense. And when we encounter setbacks, as long as we have coping mechanisms, we can be able to overcome them and show employers that we're worth the extra however many hours it takes to train.
Thank you for that. Are there any other questions? Well, I'm buzzing with ideas. I could talk all night long with this. This is a dream team panel here. But as I say, one coping mechanism some of us may employ is needing to have that downtime after we're on and activated, right? and that can be also dependent on who here is introverted or extroverted, right? So for those of us who are feeling ready for a dinner break, Tami, is there anything else you wanted to add, or should we kind of officially call a close on this?
I think we have covered so much excellent ground. I don't see any gaps. I'm ready if everyone else is.
This is such a rich and wonderful, and a stirring conversation. So yes. I'm so thankful to all of you for being here this evening.
Yes, thank you so much to the panelists. Thank you to the participants.
And thanks to Emily for organizing us.
Thanks to Emily. Yes.
Thank you all so much for having me. I appreciate it. And thanks for putting this all together. I'm in the ASAC here at AU. So if anybody has questions about disability support within the school, feel free to stop by, ask for a consult, or you can reach out to asac@american.edu. Just wanted to throw that out there for y'all.
Great. And thank you very much again, Emily and Tami and Alyssa. Really appreciate, your time and your efforts. Rebecca, Dora, pleasure to be part of this conversation with you. Close Up Foundation, is a wonderful organization. I've been with them for almost 2 years at this point. And we are going to be hiring program instructors come the spring. And those are perfect jobs for entry-level positions, recent college graduates. We hire different crops of them every spring, so feel free to reach out to me. I'll put my professional email in the chat, and happy to also just be a resource, sounding board, whatever it is, you need. And again, really, that was supposed to say .org. Really appreciate the opportunity to be here tonight.
I also want to say thank you as the Career Center very much, one, for also having me on and letting me speak, and just for putting this together. And I think I really enjoyed conversation and sort of being in conversation with Rebecca and Elliot. But I also do think that there are other conversations that are also necessary to have in terms of neurodivergence that could be sort of like an opportunity to sort of really grow and sort of expand the conversation, because I do think there are ways in which other intersectional identities might also be important to sort of talk about, whether it be through racialized lenses, first generation lenses, and other sort of backgrounds that might also be helpful to sort of talk about in terms of a future discussion on neurodiversity. Yeah,
I appreciate that, Dora. And I also recognize that we touched on primarily ADHD and autism as two conditions within neurodivergence, but as Dora earlier pointed out, there are so many other conditions that are sort of under that umbrella. So I do think that this could be like a great jumping off point for many other conversations. So stay tuned, and thank you all. Have a good rest of your evening.
Thank you.
Good night, everybody.
Good night. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.